Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Indic Observer. Today, we are diving into some big economic news. The American economy just shrank by 0.3% in the first quarter of 2025, and that's a pretty big deal. And there's a lot to unpack over here because there's tariffs, there's recession, consumer confidence, and even some global ripple effects. So, grab a cup of coffee and settle in, and let's break it all down in a way that makes sense. I'm going to keep it real, like we're just chatting, but I'll make sure you walk away with a full picture. So, first off, the US financial year for the federal government kicks off on October 1st. But when we talk about the economic quarters, we're looking at the calendar year. So, the first quarter, which is January, February, and March of 2025, just wrapped up, and the Bureau of Economic Analysis dropped a bombshell. They said that the real GDP, which is the total value of goods and services produced, shrank at a annualized rate of 0.3%, and that's a sharp drop from the 2.4% growth we saw in the last quarter of 2024. Now, to put that in perspective, GDP shrinking isn't something we see that every day. It's the worst quarterly performance since the early 2022, when the economy was still getting its way back from the COVID mess. And speaking of 2022, let's rewind for a second, right? Don't forget that back then, under President Biden, the economy actually shrank not just one, but for two quarters in a row. 1.6% in the first quarter and 0.6% in the second. And now, if you've ever taken an economics class, you know that the two consecutive quarters for negative GDP growth is the textbook definition of a recession. But here's the kicker, right? The National Bureau of Economic Research, which is the short form of NBER, basically the official scorekeeper of recessions, never called it a recession. And you would ask why? Well, some folks think that it was political because the 2022 midterm elections were right around the corner, and Biden was out there saying that that doesn't sound like a recession to me. I mean, can you imagine the headlines if they would have declared a recession right before the voters hit the polls? The economy was still adding jobs at that time, and consumer spending wasn't totally tanking. So the NBER probably felt they had enough wiggle room to avoid the recession word, but it definitely raised some eyebrows. And now, fast forward to today. Now we are seeing this 0.3% drop in the first quarter of 2025, and a lot of people are pointing fingers towards President Trump's tariffs. And here's the deal, right? Before these tariffs kicked in on April 5th, 2025, businesses and consumers went into an overdrive, importing massive amounts of goods to beat the price hikes. And we're talking a 41.3% surge in the imports, with goods like equipments and vehicles leading the chart. And that's the biggest import spike since 1974 outside of the COVID era. But here's the catch: imports subtract from GDP because they are not produced domestically. And in fact, this import frenzy shaved a whopping 5% points of the GDP number. And that's huge. Now, let's talk about why these tariffs exist in the first place, right? Trump is pushing them hard to revive the American manufacturing and reduce the country's reliance on foreign supply chains. The idea is to bring jobs back and make the US more self sufficient. And it's not just a slap on one country, there's a blanket 10% tariff on all imports, no matter where they're coming from. So let's break that down with a simple example, right? Say you're trying to import $100 worth of goods, maybe some electronic items or some clothing. And when these goods hit the US shores, you're now paying a 10% tariff. So the cost jumps to 110%. Now, who pays that? Well, it's usually the American companies importing those goods, like Walmart or Target, and they often pass those costs on to the consumers. So, yes, you and I might end up feeling a pinch at the checkout. And oh, if you caught my last video, I mentioned that China is getting hit even harder with a total tariff rate of 245% on some goods when you stack all the existing and new tariffs together. That's a massive hurdle and a roadblock for Chinese exporters. But here's a twist. There's currently a 90-day pause on some of these reciprocal tariffs, which were set to hit nearly 60 countries. And Trump announced this pause to give trading partners a chance to negotiate. But it keeps everyone on the edge because no one knows what happens when the clock runs out. Now, these imports the import surge before the tariffs wasn't the only factor dragging down the GDP. The consumer spending, which makes up about 70% of the economy, slowed at 1.8% growth rate, down from 4% in the last quarter of 2024. And that's still positive, but it's a clear sign that people are getting cautious, and the consumer confidence is taking a hit as well, because reports from the conference board show it's a 5-year low. And in April, more consumers said that they think a recession is likely in the next 12 months, and that's a big red flag. And when people get nervous, they stop spending on big ticket items like cars or vacations or big house repairs, and that can snowball. So so what happens if the next quarter so what happens if the next quarter, which is April through June, also shows a negative GDP growth? Well, we would be staring down at the textbook definition of recession again. And let me tell you this, right? The stakes are high because the US isn't just an island. It's an economy. Its economy is tied to the rest of the world, and a recession here would send shockwaves globally, hitting countries like India, which heavily exports to the US. Think like the tech services, pharmaceuticals, textiles. All these industries could take a hit if American demand dries up. And the International Monetary Fund already slashed its 2025 global growth forecast to 2.8%, partly because of these tariffs, and they're warning of a 40% chance of a US recession this year. And closer to home, the US Senate actually tried to push back on Trump's tariff bill to roll them back. And now, to give you a quick civics lesson, the Senate is the upper house of the Congress with 100 seats, two for each state. And Republicans hold a slim majority with 53 seats right now, but not all of them are on the board with tariffs, right? Some see them as a tax on consumers and businesses. So when the bill came up, it was a nail biter because it ended in a 49-49 tie with two senators being absent. And Vice President J.D. Vance, as the tiebreaker, voted with the Republicans to keep the tariffs in place. So the bill failed. So that's how close it was. Now, let's talk about the Federal Reserve, right? Because they are in the real pickle right now. The Fed's job is to keep inflation around 2%, but these tariffs are pushing prices up. And in the first quarter 2025, the Personal Consumption Expenditure Price Index, which the Fed watches very closely, jumped to a 3.6% annual rate. And the core rate, excluding food and energy, hit 3.5%. And that's way above the target. Normally, the Fed would raise the interest rates to cool things down, but the current federal funds rate is already at 4.25 to 4.5%, and the economy is shrinking. If they hike the rates now, they risk choking off economic growth even more. But if they don't, the inflation could spiral. So it's a classic catch-22 situation. Most economists think that the Fed will hold on to the rates steady at their next meeting, but they're walking on a tightrope. So, looking ahead, there is a silver line of a hope for second quarter 2025. All that stockpiled inventory from the import surge could give businesses a buffer, and some economists, like those at CBS News, are forecasting a 2% GDP rebound. But if those tariffs fully kick in after the 90-day pause, the risk of recession by the end of 2025 only grows more. And Goldman Sachs is now pegging the odds at 45%, and JP Morgan's even gloomier, saying that there's a 60% chance of global recession. Plus, with consumer confidence tanking and business hesitant to invest, it's hard to see a clear path forward. So, where does this leave us, right? The US economy is at a crossroad right now. Trump's tariffs are a bold move to reshape the trade and the country, but they're rattling the markets, the consumers, and the global partners. And the stockpile of the imports might give us a breather in second quarter, but the longer these tariffs stick around, the tougher it gets to avoid a downturn. And we all know that if the US sneezes, the rest of the world catches cold. India, China, Europe, everyone, you name it, right? So I'll keep you posted as this unfolds. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments, what do you think about these tariffs? And are they worth the risk, or are we headed for a trouble? So yeah, thanks for watching. And until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep observing. See you next time.